Greetings, friends. Welcome. Happy Friday. We made it. I can't believe this week. My goodness. You know, the story, I have not gotten around to talking about the Pope and this tiff with Trump. People are piling on Trump left and right about this. I wanted to give it a little bit of attention. Permit me, if I may, to get into this. By the way, Sam Urjovsky here. Yes, it's me behind the What's Right microphone. Friends, good to be with you. Sam at whatsrightshow.com. That is the place to reach me. I check all my emails personally. Look forward to hearing from you. You can follow me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at What's Right Sam. At What's Right Sam. That's where you find me. And if you're still one of the handful of people listening on the radio, good for you. We also have a podcast, What's Right Show. It releases first thing in the morning, so you can get this program right when the sun comes up, which is perfect. And I love hearing from you. I'm hearing from people now more and more, Robbie. I listen to your show religiously every morning. And that means you know you're doing the right thing. You know where to find us. iTunes, big iTunes announcement. I guess they're bringing video. So now you'll get the Sam Cam if you follow the program on iTunes. Great news. All right. Look, let's talk first about Trump and what he does. Because this thing with the Pope, this what many are calling an unnecessary fight with the Pope, is actually something that Trump has historically done and has historically used to succeed in getting critical messaging across. Now, what do I mean when I say this? Trump has a pattern, long-standing pattern of starting high-profile conflicts. He uses blunt rhetoric, bluster, and the like. And he blows an issue out there, and it frequently gets him big blowback, right? He gets criticized for being divisive, for being rude, for failing to preserve even the most basic levels of decorum. So, and by the way, every single one of these, and I can think of, I'll give you a few examples here in a moment. In every single one of these circumstances, the pundits all predict lasting political damage to Donaldus Maximus, right? Trump's going to really, really get it this time. And you're seeing it now here with the Pope. Lots and lots of people out there saying, well, this institution's been around for 2,000 years. Who does Donald Trump think he is? And when this first broke and people were saying this kind of stuff, somebody wrote, one of these big accounts wrote, Trump, does Trump really think he can criticize the Pope? And I turned it around and I said, who does the Pope think he is to criticize Trump? Because there are many victims out there of Trump's political cunning. And I don't care how many times the Pope talks to David Axelrod, he's not going to have the leg up here. Now let's go through some of these moments. You remember back in the 2015 campaign, no doubt, when he called, and by the way, it wasn't exactly like this, but he actually got reduced to in the media, Trump called Mexican immigrants to this country rapists. They're all rapists and murderers. What the hell are these people doing here? Now, the media lost their minds. Everybody lost their minds. Jeb Bush lost what little of his mind he had at that point. Everybody went bananas over this, right? They just all were criticizing and piling on him, and they thought it would be a political death sentence. Well, let's flash forward to now. We now understand, of course, no, not all Mexicans are rapists, but we understand that immigration to this country wasn't this, Fievel goes west, coming to America, great story, patriotism and the like, that there were, among the many illegal immigrants coming into this country, a staggering number of criminals who were doing tremendous harm to our country, to our cities, to our communities. People died. People were raped, right? This really happened. And all of a sudden, Trump's rhetoric wasn't so, I guess, appalling. as was the policy of allowing these terrible people to come in the country. There was also the national anthem protest. He called the players kneeling SOBs. Remember this? Now, flash forward to 2026, and a lot of people look at the NFL as kind of this big woke mess of an organization, and the NFL is the one that has lost a lot of its luster. I mean, the NFL has to expanding internationally just to get away from its plunging numbers in the US. Again, a win for Trump. Then there was NATO. Trump did the same thing with NATO. If you'll recall, he basically threatened to pull out. He said they were freeloaders. Everybody got the vapors. You can't call Germany freeloaders. You can't say this about the UK. These people are our allies. Then we stepped back from it. We started talking about it. Everybody was criticizing Trump, but it invited an important conversation, which was that these countries were actually not even paying the minimum required into their defense budgets, instead opting to spend that money, lavish sums, on their state welfare systems, right? And that's a fact. And by the way, ultimately, when it came to NATO, now most NATO countries are in firm compliance out of fear that American funding will be yanked. China war and the China virus, that rhetoric, very important too. It shifted the Overton window. All of a sudden, people were talking about IP theft and supply chain vulnerabilities, right? And there were deals and whatnot, but the lab leak theory, now we know the virus, COVID, that entire mess killed people, more importantly, that caused an overreaction domestically, first under Trump and then even worse under Biden, locking up students for 2 years at home, creating an absolute mess in our economy, in our society for mental health, was all done by the sloppy Chi-Coms. And we know this now, even though we were told by our thought minders that no such thing could be uttered publicly. Trump busts through these narratives. So, first off, spare me any concept or idea that the Pope is fallible when he weighs into basically political questions. Why does the Pope get to law political questions? And guess what now people are going to talk about? Because on day one of this crisis, and I think this is why it was good, Robbie, that we waited, because on day one of this crisis, on the first day or the first 2 or 3 days when Trump was calling Pope Leo names and criticizing him, people are like, "Oh, come on, this is the Pope. You gotta lay off of it." But now we are asking some very important and tough questions. And one of the first ones I'm asking that I think is probably the most important here is the money play. The Catholic Church under Joe Biden received, and the official figure is almost $3 billion, $2.9 billion to be precise, in immigration federal funding. All right? Now, remember what happened here. That money, that spigot was open the day Trump was elected. That spigot was open the day Trump came into office. And via executive order, Trump cut that money off. Now, nobody in the media is talking about that, are they? They're not talking about the fact that the Catholic Church is currently suing the Trump administration. And if you think that $2.9 billion is nothing to the Catholic Church, then you're delusional. That is a significant amount of money, even for an organization as wealthy as the Catholic Church is. So this is the thing. This is a business model. And for the Catholic Church, for the higher ups, every time you see one of these bishops talking, or you see the Pope talking, and you see them criticizing Trump, they're aligning, they're admitting their interests are aligned with the Democrats. They would have loved to have seen a Kamala Harris come into the picture. And here's the part that's really offensive to me, because, I'm not anti-Catholic in the least. My favorite relatives on my mother's side are Catholic. They're wonderful people. The Catholic Church represents a certain kind of cultural conservatism that I find very appealing. So I'm actually heartbroken about this, if anything, because the reality is that the church really only cares about money. The Pope only cares about money. He is driven by avarice, by greed. And he sits there and he lectures people like Trump and me and you as Republicans that support him, and talks down to us from his papal throne. But where is the Pope when it comes time to defending his faith, the Catholic faith, Christianity, from child murder, from mass abortions? Where was the Pope? Frankly, where was the Pope on the many Catholics who were arrested during Biden's presidency, who were thrown into solitary confinement? Think about the pro-life protesters who had their homes raided by the FBI, guns drawn, 6 kids in the house, 6 a.m., no-knock raid, just as a show of force to enforce the FACE Act, but really a crackdown on political opposition. Where was this Pope? Then a cardinal in the U.S., in Chicago, with people in his jurisdiction affected by this. Where were his words of support for faithful Catholics adhering to Catholic doctrine? Nowhere. This guy is a fraud. And frankly, the church is a fraud. And it pains me to say this. And I hope, I trust, that the institution that is the Catholic Church and the faith that is the Christian Catholic faith will survive the current leadership that controls it. I actually believe very strongly that rank and file Catholics, many of you that listen to this program, vehemently disagree with the leadership. And, it was Pope Francis too. I mean, who are we kidding, right? This has been a long in the making problem. It precedes Pope Leo. But there's an enormous amount of hypocrisy here. And Trump has blown it all wide open. And by the way, the church, Catholic charities, the $2.9 billion that were stolen from you and me, that were used to populate our country, to fill our country with a bunch of criminal illegal aliens. Think about the number of people that were affected by the heinous crimes these people committed. Think about every one of the $2.9 billion. Think about the tens of thousands of illegals that were settled into our country by the Catholic Church. The rapes, the murders, the thefts, the assaults, the burglaries. Who the hell does this Pope think he is? The church ought to be paying money, begging for forgiveness, the families that had their loved ones murdered by these thugs. There ought to be liability for the role that the Catholic Church played in this crisis. And I'll tell you, but pull the tape on Tom Homan. Tom Homan's a Catholic. Look, I'll tell you, this has absolutely got to pain him, because he has seen, as an immigration enforcement officer, up front and personal, the extent to which this crisis cost human lives. Listen to this.
I'm not going to speak for the president. I'm speaking for myself, a lifelong Catholic. I wish they stay out of immigration. They don't know what they're talking about. Because if they wore my shoes for 40 years and talked to a 9-year-old girl that got raped multiple times, or stood in the back of a tractor trailer with 19 dead aliens at my feet, including a 5-year-old boy that baked to death, if they understood the atrocities that happen on an open border, I think their opinion would change. And I welcome discussion with any of them, because they don't understand. Illegal immigration is not a victimless crime. Where President Trump had the most secure border in the lifetime of this nation right now, lives are being saved. He's saving thousands of lives a year because he has a secure border. Human traffickers are out of business, right? The cartels are going bankrupt because of that secure border. I wish they'd understand that, because if they did, I think they have a different opinion.
Yeah, this is exactly right. Somehow, it became Christ-like and acceptable for this Pope to participate in, at a nearly $3 billion scale, one of the largest human trafficking operations in history. And two things flowed from this, by the way. It's not just that among the, we'll call them harmless illegal immigrants flooding into this country, although that's not exactly fair because these immigrants cost money. These immigrants were not here lawfully. They broke the law. They came into this country illegally. They went to hospitals. They clogged emergency rooms. They clogged schools. They took away from public services for law-abiding, tax-paying Americans. But maybe they didn't go out and rape or kill or steal directly. So hidden among, that group were actual criminals. But even the people that then were coming over, still lawlessly, but coming over nonetheless, the immense harm from crossing the border, from crossing across, traversing Mexico, going up from Central America, paying drug mules and narco traffickers to move across. I mean, the human suffering that came with this was immense. And it needs to be talked about. And every person, you can't just say, oh, it was Biden. Biden was licking a ice cream cone every day at 3:00 and then going to bed. It wasn't Biden. We have to talk about the people in the administration. We have to talk about Alejandro Mayorkas. I'd love to see his ass prosecuted. But why don't we also talk about the smug communist Pope? Because this, what the Catholic Church did, and it's the role that it played in the mass migration, illegal migration of 2021 to 2025, the role the Catholic Church played is immense and is shameful. J.D. Vance was asked about this. He makes a great point here, too.
Even when there's disagreement, I like it when the Pope comments on questions of immigration. I like it when the Pope talks about abortion. I like it when the Pope talks about matters of war and peace, because I think that at the very least it invites a conversation. So I think some people, their reaction to this is to say, well, he shouldn't have said that. And look, there are certainly things that the Pope has said in the last few months that I disagree with. Let me just take one very concrete example, related to this conflict in Iran. So the Pope said something where he said, and I'm going to try to remember the exact quote, but he said that God is never on the side of those who wield the sword. God is never on the side of those who wield the sword. I'm pretty sure that he said that exact statement. Now, on the one hand, again, I like that the Pope is an advocate for peace. I think that's certainly one of his roles. On the other hand, how can you say that God is never on the side of those who wield the sword? Was God on the side of the Americans who liberated France from the Nazis? Was God on the side of the Americans who liberated Holocaust camps and liberated those innocent people from, those who had survived the Holocaust? I certainly think the answer is yes.
Exactly right. And that's where this whole thing started, by the way, right? The Pope decided to criticize what Trump was doing in Iran. He sided with the leftists. He sided with the Panicans. He's repeatedly sided with the Palestinians, with Hamas, in fact, over Israel. This guy is a radical. I might go back through his account, his social media accounts that quickly got taken down as soon as his papacy was announced. You go back and look at this. I mean, this guy was an absolute leftist wackadoodle. No, the institution does not give to him intelligence or credibility or anything. You earn that. And if you're in a position like the papacy, your insane, stupid, and ill-conceived ideas can bring shame and deteriorate the reputational strength of the institution that you represent. A quick break. Sam Rajovsky here on the What's Right Media Network. Don't go anywhere. More of the What's Right show after this.
The Sam and Ash team, they wanted me to have the best care. They had my interests at heart. I have an enormous amount of gratitude. I cannot say enough thank you.
Friends, if you've been in an accident, call Sam and Ash Injury Law. It's that simple. 800-304-2000. That's the number. A quick, easy phone call gets it done. And you take the entire stress of dealing with the insurance company, dealing with the other side, all the legal stuff, all the paperwork off your plate. It's the best way forward. You know, every day I talk to clients, and one of the things that it always surprises me, even though I'm talking about it here on the radio, on the show nonstop, is how many people will try, at least in the beginning, to work out their case, their claim on their own. It's just a claim. It's a simple thing, Sam. I just thought I could deal with it. And in the end, they get the runaround. It's frustrating. And thankfully, you know, they do the right thing. They call and get some serious legal help. Best thing is, it doesn't cost you anything out of your pocket. No money up front, no recovery, no fee. It's that easy. So please, Sam and Ash Injury Law, keep that name and number 800-304-2000 close at hand. The website, samandashlaw.com, because you deserve what's right. All right, folks. Well, you know, it's never a good idea to double down on stupid. So before we, well, I know I'm going to get to that too, Robbie. Did you hear about the air traffic control tape intercepted between two pilots? Two pilots apparently piloting a regional jet, which is one of the, you know, smaller airplanes, a point-to-point travel before, you know, between maybe some smaller airports. Apparently on the hot mic, meowing and barking at each other. Play the tape.
Meow. Meow. You guys, you need to be professional pilots. Meow, 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 meow. This is why you're still flying RJ.
RJ meaning regional jet. Literally barking and meowing at each other. I'm telling you, folks, this air traffic control system and flight system in our country is hanging by a thread. So many years, cumulative years of underqualified people being fed into this machine. And yeah, it used to be, you know, you're crit from the military. Now we'll find out more about this and get back to you on this. I'll follow it, I promise. All right, so well, when I say don't double down on stupid, the Pope first attacks Trump, gets in a tiff with Trump, and because he's got a bunch of liberal wokesters in his ear, the Pope thinks, okay, I'm winning this round. But what he doesn't realize is he's actually losing. He's losing the round. Just doesn't realize it yet, which is why the Pope went and he goes to the trip to Algeria, goes to a mosque. Okay, fine and dandy. You know, he's a religious leader. He can do that. He gets asked a question on the papal plane on his way back to the Vatican. He gets asked, and it was a softball kind of tee up question. The reporter asks him, Your Holiness, you know, there's plenty of people back home in Europe. He mentioned Europe. He said in Europe who are skeptical and concerned and fearful even. Fearful. I love that. fearful even of Islam. What's your take on this? So here's Pope Leo's answer.
I know that in Europe there are many times fears that are present but oftentimes generated by people who are against immigration and trying to keep out people who may be from another country, another religion, another race. And in that sense, I would say that we all need to work together. One of the values of this trip is precisely to raise the world's attention to the possibility that dialogue and friendship between Muslims and Christians is possible. I think one of the great lessons that Lebanon can teach to the world is precisely showing a land where Islam, Christianity are both present and are respected, and that there is a possibility to live together, to be friends. I think those are lessons that would be important also to be heard in Europe or North America, that we should perhaps be a little less fearful and look for ways of promoting authentic dialogue and respect.
This is absolutely insane. By the way, Lebanon is an example of what happens when Christians go and coexist with Islam at scale. And the Islamic takeover and destruction of Lebanon is a well-documented historic fact. Lebanon was, once upon a time in the 60s and 70s, referred to as the Switzerland of the Middle East. It is not that anymore. It is the home of Hezbollah. It is has been for years now, basically a terror-run state. Yes, they've got a government. Yes, they have a president, prime minister. They've got civil leadership, but essentially operating under the thumb of Iran's proxy terror group. It is not a good place, and you can ask any Lebanese person who's immigrated to America to tell you all about it. Don't take my word for it. This Pope is not a smart man. He's an ideologue. So that's the first thing. Now, the second thing is, I find it, I'm just going to say this, I find it interesting. Take the religion out of it, take the Catholic Church away from it, because really this guy is, I don't know what he is, right? He is the Pope, so he is in that position. But look at this as a somebody making political arguments, and making two political arguments. One is a pacifist argument, because when you look at, and this is why I'm talking now about these Islam comments, because they go together with the Pope's criticism of Trump and Iran. The Pope comes out and criticizes basically all warriors, right? If you're out there, if you are making war, not love, if you're dropping bombs instead of Bibles, okay, you're a bad person, sort of automatically. And he said that now different ways multiple times. Combine that with an admonition. Don't be afraid for Islamophobia. Don't be afraid. We can coexist with Islam, which of course is not really a religion, right? It's a very violent, domineering political system. And it's a political system, Islam is, that has used violence as a normal course of action against anyone in its path. So this Pope, if we were to listen to him, this is my caution to those of you who maybe are a little fed up with me as I'm going kind of tough on this guy. If we were to listen to him, if you were to follow these papal admonitions literally, you would lay down your arms against the most significant enemy that Christendom has ever faced in its lifetime. And you go back in history and rewind the clock. Constantinople was one of the great Christian capitals of the world. Today, the cathedral has been turned into a mosque, right? But even beyond that, look at what's happening. Oh, he says anti-immigrant. Anti-immigrant people are using this messaging what does he say? Keep out people who may be from another country, another religion, or another race. I don't think this has anything to do with race. You know, I always talk about this. I grew up in Irvine in California, and we had a number of Egyptians living in Irvine. Robbie, I think you remember this, and they were Coptic Christians. Okay, these people, these Egyptians, will tell you everything you need to know about the dangers of Islam. All right, they'll tell you. It's not about race. But he's right about the religion part of it. The problem is it's not really even a religion. You know, there was Dave Rubin had a sit-down interview with Tommy Robinson last month. He's one of the bravest men in Europe. He's in UK, and he's fighting to stop mass migration into the UK. And there is a part of this interview that I think should be mandatory listening for every leftist. I just strap them into a chair and make them listen to it. And Robinson goes to the first part of the interview. He's responding to Tucker. And he basically is laughing at Tucker Carlson that he went to the UK and he did this. And Tucker's been very pro-Islam lately. Tucker comes to, he goes, well, I landed in London. I had the loveliest driver. I had the loveliest Pakistani driver. My driver, he's from Pakistan. He was all right. And Robinson goes, okay, so based on that one interaction, Tucker, you've just decided that, everything's just a hunky-dory. You've decided, based on one interaction per your story, to ignore terrorism, to ignore the crime, to ignore the carnage that's been wrought upon England by all these people. And then what Tommy Robinson does, again, in answer to this, he gets into the scale of the Muslim rape that's been going on in the UK. And this part, I think every person ought to listen to. It's so important.
Say in Telford, I spent 18 months in Telford. I've done a 5-part series called The Rape of Britain. You can watch these documentaries at trfilms.co.uk. And I chose Telford because Telford has a 1.7% Muslim population. There's none there. Yeah? So I went there, and the police investigation identified 1,000 victims and 200 perpetrators. Yeah? 5 children are dead. They've been burned alive and murdered in this town alone. So 1,000 victims. Now, when you take the numbers and you get rid of the under-16s and you get rid of the women, there's 1,000 Muslim men in that town. Now, look what they've done in one town. Now, when you go to that town, have 1,000 Muslim men, I managed in my investigation, I sat down and I interviewed 12 to 18 survivors, yeah? And I interviewed them for 3 hours, 4 hours, 3 times, 4 times. And I built a database. And when the men were named by 3 or more girls that do not know each other, I go after them. And I go into their businesses, and I went into the businesses, some of them that murdered children, yeah? And I went into the businesses, and do you know, this isn't about sexual gratification. This is what you need to understand. In some of these cases, 11 cousins were raping kids together. Fathers and sons are raping kids together. Brothers and brother-in-laws. Imagine that. You're with your sister, her husband, and you go in and get a little kid and rape it. Well, we've never seen these crimes in the West. It's unthinkable. Not in their community. It's mainstream, and they're all accepting it. So when you see the scale of these problems, some girls had their tongues nailed to a table. Another girl was 11 years old. She had a hot iron rod with a letter M, and it was scalded onto her bum because she was the property of Mohammed. But don't worry, Tucker had a nice Pakistani taxi driver.
This is exactly right. Where is the Pope, by the way, fighting for these little girls? Nowhere to be found. Making excuses for this is dangerous. Now, I mean, look, it's not just about Telford. It's not just about a one town where a relatively tiny minority of people are creating massive increases in violent, heinous crimes. Look at some basic rape statistics, right? And this is an uncomfortable topic. I understand that, but let's look at some statistics, and let's look at 4 countries in Europe Now, I'm not picking these countries at random. Producer Robbie and I talking about this. We pick these countries because 3 of them have been very aggressive in importing Islamic immigrants over the past 25 years. All right? Now, look at from the year 2000. I'm going to look at England and Wales, call it basically the UK, but those 2 areas, countries within the UK, Germany, France, and Poland. Okay? Now, why Poland? Poland is a control group. Now, the left doesn't like to use control groups. By the way, this is why they want everybody in the EU to allow in equal numbers of Islamists from what would Trump call them if he was being provocative? S-hole countries, right? That's what. That's why they want every country. They want the Czech Republic. They want Hungary. They want Poland to all take in an equal number, proportionally, of immigrants, because they don't want a control group, because it starts to tell the story. Leftists launder bad ideas by using vessels they can pretend are immune from criticism, and they also hate having control groups where you can see the difference between their policies and other people's policies. So here's where the Pope, again, he's out there. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid. You can't criticize the Pope, right? Because he's the Pope. Don't be afraid of Muslims. We got to open our hearts and our countries and everything. Well, here's the result. England and Wales, 8,500 rapes in the year 2000. 2023, 68,000 plus rapes. They went from 85, almost 8,600 to 68,000 in 23 years. Germany, 8,100 rapes. Germany now, 39,000 plus. France, 7,500. France, in 2023, 42,400. Now, how about that pesky Poland? Poland notorious for being mean-spirited and xenophobic. By the way, some of the best Catholics in the world are Poles. And you want to know a pope that I admire still to this day, John Paul II. I'll fight you on that. That guy was a legend. I want a pope like him, not this Francis idiot and Leo, morons. Poland, they had in the year 2023 almost 2,400 rapes. That number halved by 2023, 1,127. By the way, let's look at these population figures of Muslims. England and Wales, 1.5, 1.6 million in year 2000, almost 4 million 23 years later. Germany, 3.2 million, 5.5 million in 2023. France had almost doubled, 3.5 million to 6 million. Poland, 10,000 to 20,000 by 2023, about the same, 10,000 to 25,000. You know, at what point do you ignore the numbers? I mean, I understand nobody wants to look at math. The problem with liberalism is it's feelings-based. I feel. You have to open your heart. It's the stupidest thing to do. You are opening your countries, your neighborhoods, your family up to devastation. And any person that is complicit in this, any person who has any amount of influence, who supports this crazy ideology, is responsible for it. So what do you have here? You've got a pope that is supporting human trafficking. You've got a pope that presides over an organization that took $3 billion almost of our tax dollars under Biden to shuffle illegal immigrants all around the country. Those immigrants, at best, were only a drain on our resources. And at worst, they killed our daughters, our sons, They raped people in our communities. They stole. I mean, this is no moral high ground. I can tell you that right now. And folks, one thing I do here is I give it to you straight. I don't want to be an alarmist. I think the best thing is that we can talk about this openly. And I'll leave you with this thought. And Robbie, you'll nod along, I'm sure, because you were there when this happened. Mentioned the story many times. And Robbie, this was probably 15 years ago. When you couldn't talk about this stuff openly, I was. We were. And we were on it wasn't the What's Right show, it was Sam Nation. And we were out in LA and we broadcast from a secret location deep behind the Orange Curtain, right? Because Orange County, separate from LA, more conservative, less crime, etc. It was a play on, words. But once in a while, we would do the show from the KABC studios. And, a lot of liberals in that station, even though, there was a bunch of conservative shows. Anyway, 7 to 9, we did the show. We talked about Islam. I walked out of the studio and people were looking at me like I was Hitler. We had to run out of that studio, as I recall, Robbie. It was almost uncomfortable, right? Now I still have people, smart people in my life who say, Sam, you're an alarmist. But I won't stop talking about this. We need to be aware of it. We are very insulated from it here in the country, but it's creeping up. And we gotta be vigilant. And so as far as the Pope's concerned, I'm going to tell you right now, just give it a little bit of time. You'll see that Trump has blown something wide open that needed to be talked about. You're going to watch the Overton window shift in real time. Sam Rajovsky here. Have a great weekend. I'll see you on Monday.